The first scream came just before dawn, thin and trembling, swallowed by the heavy Louisiana humidity. Inside the cramped slave quarters, the air smelled of damp earth, sweat, and the faint sweetness of boiled herbs simmering over a dying fire. Mara gripped the edge of the cot so tightly her nails split, but she didn't dare release a sound louder than a gasp. Even in childbirth, silence was survival. Two older women knelt beside her, Abeni and Ruth, steady hands, stern eyes. They had delivered dozens of babies on Beaumont Plantation, but nothing about this night felt ordinary. Abeni's breaths were shallow, too quick, as if she sensed something prowling unseen just beyond the door. "Push now," she whispered, her voice more command than comfort. Quietly, Mara obeyed, her vision blurring as pain rippled through her like lightning. A wet cry filled the room, sharp, small, alive. A baby. Abeni wrapped the infant in a scrap of linen, murmuring a prayer under her breath. But before Mara could reach for her child, another wave struck her stronger than the last. Ruth's eyes widened. "Another one," she murmured, as if the words themselves were dangerous. Outside, a floorboard groaned. Heavy footsteps, measured, too slow to belong to anyone who lived in the quarters. Mara froze. The door wasn't opened, but the presence lingered, unmistakable. Edward Beaumont. He was standing outside, listening. The second baby came harder, bloodier, and when its cry joined the first, Abeni shot a terrified glance at the door. Twins were already gossip-worthy, too visible, too symbolic in a world obsessed with lineage and signs. But the night wasn't done with Mara. The third contraction rose from somewhere deep, a primal tug that stole her breath. Ruth's lips parted in disbelief. Lord have mercy. And then the third infant slipped into the world, silent at first, then letting out a sound so soft it felt like a secret. Triplets. A rarity anywhere. A dangerous miracle here. Abeni's hands shook as she wrapped the last child. Mara. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Mara already knew. 3 children with skin just slightly too light. 3 children with the same delicate shape of nose. 3 children who could ruin a white man. Mara lay back, drenched in sweat, her chest heaving. She should have felt triumphant. 3 perfect babies alive in her arms. Instead, fear threaded through her joy like barbed wire. The door creaked, slowly, too slowly. Edward Beaumont stepped inside. His boots left small prints in the dirt floor, the soles gleaming with polish that did not belong in this room. His face was calm, as always, calm enough to terrify. His eyes swept over the infants, lingering just long enough to betray something he would never allow himself to admit. A claim. "This is unusual," he said softly, closing the door behind him. Even Abeni's hands trembled at the sound of it clicking shut. The lantern cast a warm halo around him, outlining the tension in his jaw. "Triplets," he murmured, "born on my plantation." No one spoke. The walls seemed to lean inward, listening. He knelt, an act none of them had ever witnessed, and studied each baby with meticulous, unsettling interest. Mara wished desperately to turn away, but her body refused to move, pinned by terror, stronger than pain. Beaumont brushed a thumb over the cheek of the smallest child. The gesture looked gentle, affectionate even, and that made it worse. Danger wrapped in tenderness. Abeni cleared her throat, voice low. "Master Beaumont, we will keep the children healthy. No need for worry." "Worry?" He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. "Worry is precisely what's required. People will talk. People always talk." His gaze flicked to Mara, and for the briefest moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps even guilt. But it vanished quickly behind the practiced mask of a Southern gentleman. He stood and adjusted his coat. "I will return tomorrow. Until then, no word of this leaves these walls." As he turned to leave, a gust of cold air swept in from the open doorway, rattling the tin cups hanging on a nearby shelf. Abeni clutched her chest, Ruth bowed her head, and Mara closed her eyes around the fragile weight of her newborns. When Beaumont stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness, Mara heard him pause. just for a heartbeat, as if the enormity of what had happened, what he had allowed to happen, had finally reached him. Then his footsteps receded. But the silence he left behind was not relief. It was the beginning of something tightening around the entire plantation, something that none of them yet had a name for, something already moving toward Mara and her children. By mid-morning, the news had already begun to slide through the plantation like a stray spark searching for dry hay. No one said triplets, not aloud, not yet. But the whispers carried weight. Something happened in the quarters last night. Master Beaumont was there. A woman screamed 3 times. Even the cicadas seemed unusually quiet, as if the humid Louisiana air itself was listening. Mara sat on a wooden stool outside the quarters, the 3 newborns swaddled in linen beside her. Their tiny breaths rose and fell like uncertain promises. She kept her eyes lowered, but her back remained stiff, bracing for something she could not stop, only endure. Abeni stood nearby, grinding herbs against a flat stone. "Stay calm," she murmured. "We must act as if nothing unusual happened." But how could Mara pretend? Every instinct inside her burned with the knowledge that the world had shifted. The baby's light skin tone seemed to glow even in the shade, a brightness that felt like a warning. Down the hill, the house loomed, white columns, manicured gardens, a symbol of order built on bones. Inside, a different storm was brewing. Eleanor Beaumont was pale with fury. She stared at her husband across the breakfast table, her spoon clinking sharply against porcelain. "You left the house before dawn," she said, each syllable clipped. "Where were you?" Edward was usually composed, but today his fingers tightened around the newspaper, crinkling its edges. "Checking the fields." "In the dark?" Her eyes narrowed, sharp as a needle. "You don't visit the quarters unless something's amiss." He did not answer. Silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Eleanor pushed her plate aside. "The neighbors already chatter about your generosity with the women. If there's something I should know, something that risks this family." "There is nothing," he said too quickly, too firmly. The lie hung in the air. Eleanor leaned back, studying him with cold precision. She had been raised among Southern elites, trained to read men the way others read scripture. She saw the guilt in his posture, the reluctance in his eyes. Something had happened, something he feared. And fear meant vulnerability. "Very well," she said, though her tone promised nothing was forgiven. "But I will not tolerate being left blind in my own home." Edward rose abruptly from the table, but his steps faltered as he reached the door. For a moment he seemed suspended between duty, desire, and dread, a man cornered by his own choices. Outside, the plantation workers watched him from a distance. They knew the look on his face. They had seen it on other men, white men, who fathered children in the shadows and spent the rest of their lives pretending not to see the mirrored features staring back at them. As Edward approached the quarters, conversations died mid-sentence. A few of the enslaved bowed their heads. Others turned away entirely. He stepped inside without knocking. Mara stiffened, clutching one of the babies to her chest. The other 2 slept beside her, their small fists curled like unopened buds. Edward closed the door behind him, sealing out the world. "We need to discuss arrangements," he said. His voice sounded too calm, unnaturally so. "Triplets attract attention. Attention is dangerous." Mara did not speak. She feared what her own voice might reveal. He paced the small room, nearly brushing the low ceiling. "People talk. They'll ask questions. We must protect the household." "Protect yourself," Mara thought. But she kept the words buried. Edward stopped in front of her, lowering his gaze to the infants. For the first time, he looked conflicted, genuinely torn. Something inside him softened as he studied their faces, their smallness, their helplessness. "These children," he murmured, almost to himself. "They cannot all stay here." Abeni inhaled sharply. Ruth looked away. Mara felt the world tilt, the floor drop away. "Master," she whispered, her voice cracking. He raised a hand, not in violence but in warning. "I am not doing this out of cruelty. I am doing what must be done to preserve order." But the words were wrong. They wobbled, uncertain, betraying the truth beneath. He was trying to preserve himself. He turned toward the door. Before supper, I will return with a plan. Prepare yourself. When he stepped outside, the light swallowed him. A breeze swept through the room, lifting the edges of the linens around the babies as if the air itself were attempting to shield them. Benny touched Mara's shoulder gently. "Hold on," she whispered. "Something else is coming." And it was, moving through the plantation, through the house, through the fragile threads holding everything still together. Something about to break. The afternoon sun settled over the plantation in a heavy, molten haze, thick enough to make the air shimmer. Cicadas wailed from the tall oaks, their relentless song vibrating like a warning no one could decipher. Mara sat outside the quarters with the babies, rocking them slowly, though her own breath trembled. She felt watched, by the sky, by the land, by the future, creeping toward her in slow, merciless steps. Inside the house, a different kind of heat burned. Eleanor Beaumont stood in her dressing room before a tall mirror framed in carved mahogany. Her fingers pressed into the wood until her knuckles blanched. She could not shake the feeling that something beyond her control was brewing. Her husband's behavior, the servants' whispers, the uneasy glances exchanged by the maids, it all pointed in one direction. A direction she refused to name. She turned sharply as her maid Clarissa entered with her hairpins. "You were downstairs earlier," Eleanor said. "What did you hear?" Clarissa hesitated. She knew better than to lie, but the truth could ignite more fire than she could contain. "Ma'am, they say, Miss Mara in the quarters. She birthed 3 babies last night." Eleanor's mouth tightened. 3? "Yes, ma'am." Clarissa lowered her eyes, but Eleanor stepped closer like a predator scenting blood. "And my husband? Was he there?" The maid swallowed. "They say he came early this morning, before sunrise. Stayed a while." The hairpins clattered onto the vanity. Eleanor's pulse throbbed in her temples. Generations of Southern propriety, expectations, and silent humiliations pressed against her ribs. It was one thing for white men to take what they wanted from the enslaved women. Every wife in the region lived with that shadow. But triplets born on her land, under her roof, such a thing demanded answers. And punishment. Down on the plantation grounds, Edward Beaumont was already unraveling. He walked the perimeter of the fields, but his mind circuited in tight, suffocating loops. 3 babies. His blood, he could see it in their skin, their faces. That resemblance might be subtle now, but in time, it would deepen. People would notice. Neighbors would whisper, his wife would suspect. And if the wrong man recognized the truth, his reputation, his power, would be undone. As he passed a group of field workers, their eyes briefly lifted. Not long enough to be disrespectful, but long enough to reveal their curiosity, their knowing. He felt exposed, as though the sun had stripped his skin away. When Edward reached the quarters again, Mara was still outside. She didn't rise as he approached. She only held the babies closer, her chin trembling despite her efforts to hide it. He spoke quietly. "I have made a decision." Benny appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't interrupt, but she stayed close enough to hear, close enough to intervene if needed. Edward cleared his throat. 2 of the children must be sent away." The words dropped like a stone into still water, silent at first, then rippling outward in destructive waves. Mara closed her eyes, her heart twisting painfully. "Please, master. They are mine. And mine," he almost said, but didn't. He looked toward the fields instead, jaw clenched. "They will be placed with a trader I trust. Far from here. Somewhere they can grow without questions. One child may stay. The others cannot." Benny stepped forward. "Master, you cannot ask a mother." "I am not asking." His voice was sharp now, brittle with panic. "This is how it must be." Mara felt lightheaded. The world shrank to the thin linen bundles in her arms. How could she choose? How could any human make such an impossible choice? Edward softened just enough to look human. "If word spreads, it will not be only the children who suffer." His eyes flickered to Mara's. "You understand what is at stake." He left before she could speak, as though fleeing the weight of his own decision. As the sun lowered, long shadows stretched across the plantation. Mara carried the babies inside, tears sliding silently down her face. Abeni shut the door, offering what little protection 4 wooden walls and a whisper of hope could provide. Ruth placed a hand on Mara's back. "We will find a way," she murmured. "There is always a way, even when it hides from us." But Mara could barely hear her. Her heart was already breaking in slow, deliberate cracks. Outside, the gravel path crunched. Eleanor Beaumont approached. Her steps were graceful, controlled, the way a blade glides before it cuts. And though she knocked on the door with a genteel rhythm, the room fell still, because everyone inside knew a new storm had arrived. Eleanor Beaumont entered the quarters as though stepping into a courtroom, the kind where she alone served as judge, jury, and executioner. The lantern Abeni held lit her face from below, sharpening every line, casting her pale skin into something ghost-like. Mara stood near the cot, holding all 3 babies in her trembling arms. The room tightened around her like a fist. Eleanor's gaze drifted over the infants with unsettling calm, lingering on their features, their color, the undeniable thread connecting them to someone she shared a roof with. Her lips curved into a smile that did not touch her eyes. "So," she said softly, "this is what kept my husband wandering in the dark." No one answered. The silence was thick, dangerous. Eleanor stepped forward, trailing one hand across the rough wooden wall as if inspecting the condition of something she owned. The gesture made Mara's spine stiffen, because that was precisely the message. Ownership. "These children," Eleanor whispered, "look nothing like their mother." Mara felt her knees weaken. She forced herself to steady her arms, tightening her hold on the infants. She had no words, not ones she dared speak aloud. Eleanor turned sharply toward Abeni. "Leave us." Abeni didn't move, her jaw tensed, her eyes fierce. "Ma'am, Mara just gave birth. I said leave us." The words cracked like a whip. Abeni looked at Mara, torn between obedience and protection, but Mara gave a small nod, barely perceptible. Abeni stepped out, though she kept the door open a sliver, refusing to abandon the space entirely. Eleanor approached Mara now, close enough that the lace on her sleeve brushed one of the swaddled infants. 3 children, she murmured. Quite the spectacle. Mara's breath hitched. Eleanor's voice dropped to a velvety whisper. "You will tell me the truth." Her eyes flashed like cold steel. Who fathered them? Mara didn't know what answer could keep her alive. The wrong word could ignite violence from multiple sides. The truth could destroy her. A lie could do worse. So she stayed silent. Eleanor's smile faded. "I see." She paced slowly, her silk skirts whispering across the dirt floor. "My husband believes he can manage this situation quietly. He underestimates how far I am willing to go to protect my home. Her lineage, her status, her pride." Eleanor stopped pacing and faced Mara again. "I will not allow scandal to rot this family. 2 of these children will be removed. Immediately." The words hit harder than any blow. Mara shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Please, ma'am. They are my babies." Eleanor leaned in, her voice suddenly cold and sharp. "And you are mine." The room seemed to fold inward. Mara's heart pounded so violently she felt nauseous. Eleanor continued. "Edward plans to send them away. A trader in Mississippi, I believe. But I know what men like him do with children like these." She tilted her head. "Do you?" Mara nodded weakly. She knew all too well. Children sold young, sometimes separated, sometimes worse. Their fates swallowed by distance and cruelty. Eleanor straightened her back. "You will choose 2. If you refuse, all 3 will be taken." Mara nearly collapsed. Eleanor's eyes softened. "Not out of kindness, but calculation. Think carefully. 1 child stays here. 1 child survives this place. That is more than most women in your position are ever offered." A breeze slipped through the doorway, making the lantern flicker. For a moment, Eleanor's face shifted in the unsteady light, looking almost human, almost broken beneath her fury. Make your choice before nightfall, she whispered. Then she turned and left, her silhouette sharp against the fading evening light. As the door creaked shut, Abini rushed in. Mara sank to her knees, all three babies crying now, their tiny wails merging with her silent agony. Ruth knelt beside her. "We'll think of something," she murmured. "We always do." But Mara felt the truth like a stone in her chest. This choice was not one she could outrun, not one prayers alone could soften. Night crept across the plantation, carrying with it a suffocating quiet. Edward paced the veranda. Eleanor watched from her window. The enslaved whispered in fearful tones. Somewhere, a whip cracked in the distance. Once, twice, a reminder of the brutal order that ruled every breath taken on this land. Mara held her children close, rocking them as if motion alone could protect them from the world closing in. 3 breaths, 3 heartbeats, 3 lives balanced on the edge of a decision she could not bear to make. And outside, beneath the drifting shadows of the magnolia trees, someone was approaching the quarters again. Slow steps, deliberate, carrying news that would change everything. Night settled over Beaumont Plantation with an eerie stillness, as if the land itself were waiting for a verdict. Clouds drifted low over the cane fields, muting the moonlight, casting the entire landscape in a bruise-colored haze. Inside the quarters, Mara sat on the floor with her back against the cot, the 3 babies sleeping unevenly across her lap. Their breaths were soft, fragile, unaware of the fate hovering above them. Footsteps approached, slow, steady, familiar. Abini eased the door open. "It's old Isaac," she whispered. The elderly man stepped inside, his cane tapping the floor like a heartbeat. His face was lined, his body bent, but his eyes, sharp, knowing, carried decades of witnessing things that should never have been done. "Mara," he said quietly, lowering himself beside her. "I heard what Mistress demanded." Mara shook her head, tears stinging her throat. "I can't choose, Isaac. I can't give up any of them." He reached out, brushing a trembling hand over the smallest infant's blanket. "A mother shouldn't have to. But we must think fast. Time ain't on your side." Abini closed the shutters, lowering the lantern light. "We can hide them," she whispered. "Move them to the far sheds or the curing barn. Eleanor won't search there tonight." Isaac sighed. "Hide 'em, and Mistress'll tear this place apart come morning. You know that." The room fell silent. Even the babies seemed to sense the tension, their tiny bodies curling closer into Mara's warmth. Ruth entered quietly, closing the door behind her. Edward is on the veranda. He looks haunted. He keeps staring at the fields like he's waiting for something to rise out of the dark. Isaac nodded grimly. He knows what he's done and what he's about to do. Mara clutched her children, her voice barely a breath. "Please, help me." He hesitated, weighing the cost of every word before speaking. "There may be a way, but it's dangerous. More dangerous than anything we've done before." Mara lifted her eyes, desperate. "Tell me." Isaac leaned closer. "There's a family 2 miles downriver, free folks of color. They owe me a debt from years back. If we can get 2 of the babies there tonight, under cover of dark, they'll take 'em in, raise 'em as their own. Mistress will think the traitor took them, and the 3rd will stay with you." Mara's breath hitched. The idea was terrifying, but it held a thin thread of hope. Abini looked at her. "It's the only way to keep them alive." Ruth nodded. "And keep you alive." Before Mara could answer, the latch clicked. The door swung open. Edward Beaumont stepped inside. He looked different tonight. Older, worn, like a man unraveling at the seams. His eyes landed on Mara, then the babies, then the circle of people around her. He closed the door softly. Not with violence, worse, with resignation. "Mara," he murmured, voice rough. "The traitor arrives at dawn." She flinched as if struck. Edward approached slowly, hands trembling at his sides. "I didn't want this. I never meant for any of this. But I cannot allow my name, my home, my wife—" "Your wife knows," Isaac interrupted, his tone razor-thin. Edward stiffened. "What did she say?" "Enough," Isaac replied. We all know that look in her eyes. She'll see those children gone one way or another. Edward exhaled shakily. Then I must act first. Mara rose, holding all 3 babies. Her knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of terror and love intertwined. Please, she whispered. Don't take them. Edward's gaze flickered, not with cruelty but with something closer to self-loathing. If you keep them all here, none of you will survive what comes next. Eleanor will not allow it. A long silence followed, thick and suffocating. Then he said something none of them expected. I will cover for you. Abeni blinked. Cover? For us? Edward nodded slowly. If you send 2 of the children away tonight, no one will know I didn't arrange it. I'll say the traitor came early. I'll say I handled it myself. You'll keep the 3rd. She will believe the matter settled. Mara stared at him, stunned. Why? His throat tightened. Because I owe them that much. Them. Not her. The babies. His children. The room felt suddenly colder. Isaac leaned toward Mara. The choice is still yours. Mara looked down at the 3 small faces, 3 tiny hearts that had never asked to be born into a world ruled by someone else's pride. Her soul tore in half as she whispered, I'll go. They wrapped the 2 smallest infants in dark cloth. Abeni pressed her forehead to Mara's. Ruth kissed each baby gently. Isaac prepared the path. Edward stepped aside, letting Mara pass. But as she carried her children into the night, the wind shifted, cold, sharp, almost warning, because someone else was awake. A curtain on the upper floor of the main house moved. Eleanor Beaumont was watching, and she did not look convinced. If you made it to the end of this story, now it's your turn. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Mara's place? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next powerful story. Share this video with someone who loves intense historical narratives. And don't forget to leave a like. It truly helps the channel grow.